The millionaire's wife found the positive pregnancy test in the maid's uniform pocket. She didn't scream. She didn't fire her on the spot. She placed the test on the marble counter between them and smiled. "This," she whispered, her voice chillingly calm, "changes everything." For Alara, the young maid, the world stopped. This was the proof of her ruin. Carrying the child of her powerful boss, Alastair Harrington. She had expected fury, a public shaming, to be thrown onto the streets. She was prepared for that war. She was not prepared for this quiet, terrifying acceptance. Harrington Manor was a kingdom of secrets, each room holding a different lie. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money, a scent that clung to your clothes and your conscience. Alara's secret was now out, but instead of an explosion, there was only this eerie, silent pact. The wife, Eleanor, should have been her ultimate enemy. Yet, in that moment, she felt like the only person who understood the true danger, Alastair himself. He had promised to destroy her if she ever spoke a word, but he never considered his wife might find out without a single word being spoken. Now, Alara was trapped in a new, more complicated nightmare. The wife held her future in the palm of her hand. That smile wasn't one of kindness. It was a signal. A game of chess had just begun, and Alara was a pawn who had just been moved into a position she didn't understand. Before we uncover the wife's shocking plan, we need to know what you think. What would you do in Alara's impossible situation? Could you trust the woman who should be your greatest enemy? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And before we continue, tell me also where you are watching this from, and subscribe, because the rules of power and betrayal are about to be rewritten. Alastair Harrington did not simply enter a room. He conquered it. His presence was an atmospheric shift, a drop in pressure that made the air itself feel heavy and difficult to breathe. For Alara, his arrival home was signaled not by the sound of the grand oak door, but by the scent that preceded him, a costly blend of sandalwood cologne and fine whiskey, a smell that had once been abstract and sophisticated but was now the aroma of her own personal nightmare. He was a man carved from confidence and old money, his age etched not as wrinkles, but as grooves of authority around his eyes and mouth. At 48, he was the undisputed king of this domain, and everyone in it was a subject. His charm was a precision tool, used to disarm and to manipulate. But Alara had seen what lay beneath the polished surface. She had seen the cold, calculating engine that powered his smile. It had happened on a night 6 weeks ago, a late evening where she had been the only staff remaining, clearing the detritus from his study after a private, intense phone call. He had been drinking. The charming facade had been sanded away by the whiskey, leaving only the raw, demanding core of him. He didn't ask. He didn't plead. He simply took, his hands firm and unyielding, his voice a low command in the dark room. The memory was a series of brutal sensory fragments. The coarse texture of the Persian rug against her back, the oppressive weight of his body, the sharp, medicinal taste of the whiskey on his breath as he leaned close. Afterward, as she lay shattered on the floor, he had stood, straightened his suit jacket as if brushing off a piece of lint, and looked down at her. His eyes were clear and empty. "You will forget this," he had stated, his voice flat and final. "If you ever speak of it, to anyone, I will not only destroy you, Alara. I will erase you. Your name, your history, your future. It will be as if you never existed at all." He wasn't yelling. That was the most terrifying part. He was simply stating a fact, a transaction that had been concluded. He had taken what he wanted, and the price of her silence was her very existence. From that moment on, the scent of sandalwood and whiskey didn't just signal his presence. It triggered a primal fear, a cold dread that coiled in her stomach and reminded her that she was not a person to him. She was property, and now she was damaged goods. Eleanor Harrington was the silent heart of the manor, a ghost in its own machine. She moved through the opulent rooms with a weightless grace, her presence often noticed only after she had passed, a lingering trace of gardenias in the air, a subtle shift in the light. At 45, she was a portrait of elegant decay, her beauty still evident but stretched thin over a frame of profound weariness. Her clothes were always impeccable, her posture perfect, yet her eyes held a distant, hollow look, as if she were watching a movie only she could see. The staff spoke of her in hushed, pitying tones. They called her the ghost, not out of malice, but because she seemed only half present in her own life. A great sadness clung to her, a story everyone knew the outline of, but no one understood the full text. Years ago, the Harrington's only son had died in infancy, a tragedy from which she had never recovered. The manor was her mausoleum, and she its most beautiful, sorrowful monument. Alara had always thought the woman was simply broken, a bird with clipped wings living in a gilded cage she had no desire to escape. But after the encounter in the bathroom, Alara began to see the cracks in that assumption. The sadness was there, yes, a deep and endless well of it. But there was something else lurking in the depths of Eleanor's gaze, a sharp, unblinking intelligence. She noticed everything. The way a vase was dusted, the slight tremor in a maid's hand, the unspoken tension in a room. She was not a ghost. She was a warden, watching over her prison with a quiet, unnerving acuity. Her silence was not an absence, but a presence. And her smile was not a surrender, but a weapon Alara did not yet know how to wield. The days following the bathroom incident stretched into a taut, silent wire of tension. Life in the manor proceeded with its usual clockwork precision, but for Alara, every tick of the grand hallway clock was a hammer blow. She found herself constantly aware of Eleanor, feeling the woman's gaze like a physical touch on the back of her neck. It was in the morning, as Alara polished the banister, and Eleanor would descend the staircase, her eyes briefly meeting Alara's before flicking away. It was in the dining room, as Alara served afternoon tea, and Eleanor would watch her over the rim of her china cup, her expression unreadable. The physical symptoms of her pregnancy were becoming harder to conceal. A sudden wave of nausea would hit her in the stuffy heat of the laundry room. A dizzy spell made her stumble on the perfectly vacuumed carpet of the library. During one of these moments, she had to brace herself against a bookshelf, closing her eyes until the world righted itself. When she opened them, Eleanor was standing in the doorway, having entered without a sound. She didn't ask if Alara was all right. She didn't need to. Her eyes dropped to Alara's midsection for a fraction of a second, then returned to her face, a world of understanding passing between them in that silent, loaded glance. She then turned and left, the whisper of her silk dress and the scent of gardenias the only evidence she had ever been there. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. The secret was a shared burden now, and Eleanor was waiting. The unspoken question hung in the air, more terrifying than any direct confrontation. She was waiting for what? For Alara to break? To confess? Or for something else entirely? The wire was pulled tighter, and Alara didn't know how much longer she could walk it without falling. The request came as a soft chime from the intercom. Alara, please join me in the conservatory. Eleanor's voice was calm, but the words sent a jolt of pure ice through Alara's veins. The moment of judgment had arrived. She found Eleanor standing amidst the vibrant, humid greenery, her back turned as she examined a rare, deep purple orchid. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the main house. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The body speaks a truth the mouth is often too frightened to utter, Eleanor said, her voice conversational, as if commenting on the weather. She didn't turn around. It's a language of tells, a sudden aversion to certain smells, a wave of fatigue in the afternoon, a protective hand that flies to the belly when one feels unobserved. Alara's breath hitched. She felt exposed, her secret laid bare under the gentle, devastating logic. Ma'am, I've just been tired, she stammered, the lie feeling flimsy and pathetic. Eleanor turned slowly. Her gaze was not angry, but piercingly direct, seeing straight through the facade. Let's not waste time with denials, my dear. I have seen this play before. I know the script by heart. The father is Alistair, is it not? The use of his first name, the sheer certainty in her tone, shattered the last of Alara's defenses. The fear, the isolation, the crushing weight of Alistair's threat, it all came pouring out in a choked sob. He said he would destroy me, she wept, her shoulders slumping in defeat. He said if I ever told a soul, he would erase me. Eleanor's face remained a mask of calm composure, but a shadow flickered in her eyes, a dark, familiar recognition. She took a step closer, the silk of her dress whispering against the tiled floor. Of course he did, she murmured, her voice low and strangely gentle. That is his only true talent. The art of the threat, the promise of ruin. She looked at Alara, truly looked at her, not as a servant or a rival, but as a person. You believe you are alone in this? That you are the first girl to find herself in this impossible situation within these walls? The question hung in the humid air, reshaping everything Alara thought she knew. This was not the reaction of a vengeful wife. This was something else entirely. Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the glass ceiling, looking at something far beyond the panes. This beautiful house is a fortress of silence, she said, her tone shifting into one of grim wisdom. Its foundations are built on the quiet suffering of women. Alistair believes his money and power make him a king, but they only make him a man who has never been held accountable. Her eyes returned to Alara, and in their depths, a new, steely resolve had taken root. He sees you as a problem to be disposed of, but I see a child who deserves a future, and I see a way to finally make him answer for his crimes. Eleanor's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, the words meant for Alara alone. We will tell him nothing. For now, the secret remains ours. She outlined a plan so simple it was terrifying. Alara would continue her work, but with new, careful privileges, lighter duties, more rest, better food, all explained away by a fictitious, lingering anemia that Eleanor would personally endorse to the housekeeper. It was a shield, crafted from lies, but it was protection nonetheless. You must trust me, Eleanor said, her eyes locking with Alara's. You must follow my lead exactly. Alistair is a predator, and his instincts are sharp. He must see no change in you, no flicker of defiance. Can you do that? Can you wear the mask of the frightened girl even as we plot behind his back? The question hung in the air, a lifeline and a shackle in one. To survive the wolf, she was being asked to place her fate, and the fate of her child, entirely in the hands of the wolf's wife. The choice was no longer between fight or flight. It was between trusting a dangerous stranger or facing a certain monster alone. Days turned into a tense, new routine. Eleanor's protection was a tangible thing, a subtle force field that altered the household's dynamics. The cook, on Mrs. Harrington's orders, began preparing iron-rich meals for Alara. The head housekeeper reassigned the heaviest cleaning tasks. The other maids cast suspicious glances, but dared not question the lady of the house. The charade was holding. Then, one afternoon, Eleanor summoned Alara to her private sitting room, a sanctuary of soft blues and gentle light that felt a world away from the rest of the mansion. Sit, Eleanor said, her voice weary. She stood by the window, her silhouette frail against the daylight. The performance we are staging is only the first act. To understand the final scene, you must know the full truth of our stage. She turned, and in the unflinching light, Alara saw it clearly, the delicate network of lines around her eyes, the unnatural thinness of her wrists, a profound fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Alistair's greatest weapon has always been time. He waits, he wears you down, he outlasts you. But his weapon has been blunted. She took a slow, measured breath. I am dying, Alara. The doctors give me a year, perhaps less. It is a cancer, quiet and relentless. The confession landed not with a shout, but with the quiet finality of a tombstone sealing shut. This changes the nature of our alliance, you see. For Alistair, my illness is an inconvenience, a timeline for his affairs. For me, it is a deadline. It is the reason I can no longer afford the luxury of anger or the slow burn of resentment. I must act, and I must act now. My war is no longer for a marriage. It is for a legacy. And your child, my dear, has just become the most important piece on the board. The summons to Eleanor's private sitting room felt different this time. The air in the small, elegant space was still, heavy with the scent of medicine beneath the gardenias. Eleanor was not standing with her usual poised grace, but seated in a high-backed chair, a cashmere shawl draped over her shoulders despite the room's warmth. The daylight from the window was unforgiving, etching the lines of pain and exhaustion onto her face with brutal clarity. The constant, gnawing fear began to change Alara. The initial, paralyzing terror she had felt in the bathroom and the conservatory was slowly being forged into something harder, something unyielding. It happened during a quiet moment, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. She felt the first, unmistakable flutter, a quickening. It was not a symptom anymore. It was a presence. A tiny, independent life communicating its existence. In that moment, something inside her solidified. This was no longer just about her survival. It was about her child's future. She looked at Eleanor, who was watching her with knowing eyes, and gave a single, firm nod. The last vestiges of the frightened girl were shed. She was no longer a pawn waiting to be moved. She was a queen, ready to defend her own. The fear was still there, but it was now a fuel, not a chain. She would wear the mask, she would play the part, but she would do it with the fierce, unwavering heart of a mother. Alistair was not just fighting his wife's cunning anymore. He was fighting the raw, primal power of a parent protecting their young. An invitation arrived, engraved on heavy cream cardstock. A formal family dinner was to be held at the manor. It was not a request, it was a command. Alistair's mistress, Celia, was on the guest list. The purpose was clear to everyone. This was Alistair's demonstration of power. A showcase of his chosen future, a deliberate provocation aimed at his wife and the maid hiding in plain sight. The mansion was thrown into a frenzy of preparation. The air, once thick with secrets, was now electric with impending confrontation. Silver was polished to a blinding shine, crystal gleamed, and the scent of elaborate dishes being prepared wafted from the kitchen. Eleanor and Alara prepared in silence, a united front. Eleanor selected a gown of defiant crimson. Alara, in her maid's uniform, made sure every detail of the table setting was perfect, her movements calm and deliberate. They didn't need to speak. They both knew the dinner was a trap, but they also knew it was the stage for their final, decisive move. The calm in their suite was profound, a deep, still pool before the waterfall. The storm was coming, and they were ready to meet it. The dining hall was a vision of oppressive grandeur. A chandelier dripping with crystal cast 1,000 fractured points of light over the long, mahogany table set, with flawless china and gleaming silver. The air was a cloying mix of roasted meat, expensive perfume, and unspoken hostility. Alistair sat at the head of the table, a king on his throne, his arm draped possessively over the chair of the stunning, sharp-featured woman beside him, Celia. She was everything Alara was not. Polished, confident, her smile a razor blade sheathed in silk. She looked at Eleanor with barely concealed triumph and at Alara with dismissive curiosity. Eleanor, in her crimson gown, was a splash of defiant blood in the monochrome formality. She ate slowly, her movements graceful and unperturbed, engaging Celia in polite, cutting conversation about art and society, topics designed to highlight Alara's exclusion. Alara moved around the table, replenishing water glasses, her uniform a shield of invisibility. She felt the weight of every gaze. Alistair's cold scrutiny, Celia's bored indifference, and the pitying glances from the few other family members. Each clink of a fork against a plate was a gunshot in the tense silence. It was a psychological siege, and Alistair was clearly enjoying his display of dominance, believing he had cornered both his wife and his problem. He was setting the stage for the final act, confident he held the only script. As dessert was being cleared, Alistair tapped his crystal water glass with a silver spoon. The sharp ring silenced the room. All eyes turned to him. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a performance of paternal disappointment. "Before we retire," he began, his voice smooth and carrying, "a rather unpleasant matter has come to my attention. It seems a piece of jewelry is missing from my wife's collection. A diamond and emerald bracelet, a family heirloom." A collective, sharp intake of breath went around the table. His gaze, heavy and accusatory, settled on Alara, who had frozen mid-step, a dessert plate in her hand. "Alara," he said, his tone dripping with feigned regret, "as you have had the most intimate access to our private quarters during my wife's confinement, I'm afraid questions must be asked. The security footage near the safe is, unfortunately, corrupted. A most unfortunate coincidence." He let the implication hang in the air, thick and suffocating. He wasn't just accusing her of theft. He was demonstrating his power to fabricate evidence, to bend reality to his will. This was his masterstroke. A public, believable crime that would see her arrested, discredited, and permanently removed. Celia watched with a smug, satisfied smile. The other guests looked away, embarrassed. He had played his king. He had cornered the pawn, and in his mind, the game was over. He leaned back, waiting for the tears, the denials, the satisfying collapse of the girl who dared to threaten his perfect future. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. The sound was not a sob or a plea. It was the soft, deliberate scrape of a chair against the marble floor. Every head turned as Eleanor Harrington rose to her full height, a queen ascending her dais. The crimson of her gown seemed to deepen, a banner of war. The frail, dying woman was gone, replaced by a figure of immense, unshakable authority. "Thank you, Alistair, for so perfectly illustrating the man you are," she began, her voice not loud, but clear and cutting, carrying to every corner of the room. "A man who would fabricate a theft to dispose of a young woman. But your information, as always, is selectively curated." She turned her gaze to the stunned guests. "The bracelet is not missing. It is in a safety deposit box, along with the rest of my personal collection, which I moved the day my doctor confirmed my terminal diagnosis. I did not trust the man who had already begun measuring my life in terms of his inheritance." Alistair's face began to lose its color. "Eleanor, this is not the—" "It is precisely the time," she interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "You see, while you were waiting for me to die, and grooming your replacement," she said, with a dismissive glance at a horrified Celia, "you failed to notice the life growing under your own roof. Alara is not a thief. She is the mother of your child." "My child." The gasp that rippled through the room was audible. Eleanor pressed on, a force of nature. "This is not your heir, Alistair. This is mine. A miracle I will claim with my last breath. And thanks to the urgency of my timeline, my attorneys were most efficient. My will has been rewritten and irrevocably sealed. Every share, every property, the entire controlling interest of the Harrington estate bypasses you entirely. It is placed in a trust for this child, with Alara as its guardian until they come of age. You are not the heir to this family. You are its caretaker, a custodian for the child you tried to erase." For a long moment, Alistair Harrington did not move. He simply sat, the architecture of his face collapsing from smug triumph into utter, vacant shock. The carefully constructed empire of his ego had been detonated from within. He was no longer a king. He was a man in a suit, publicly unmasked and financially neutered in front of his peers and his chosen future. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The power he had wielded like a weapon, the threats, the money, the control, had evaporated into the chandelier-lit air. Celia shoved her chair back, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "You lied to me?" she hissed at Alistair, before snatching her purse and storming out, the click of her heels echoing her final exit from his life. The other guests looked anywhere but at Alistair, their pity now reserved for him. The staff, who had witnessed the entire scene, stood with a new, unspoken solidarity. The balance of power in the manor had not just shifted, it had been inverted. The man who ruled by fear was now its primary victim, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, destined to watch from the sidelines as the world he built was inherited by the very proof of his cruelty. The victory was quiet. There was no celebration, only the profound and solemn silence of a battlefield after the war. Alara gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a private hospital suite, paid for by the trust Eleanor had established. The official announcement, released by Eleanor's lawyers, celebrated the miraculous birth of a son to Eleanor and Alistair Harrington. The world saw a story of hope amidst tragedy. They never saw the young mother who nursed the child, her role officially that of a devoted, lifelong nanny and legal guardian. Alara was provided for, her future and her son's future secured beyond any dream she had ever dared to have. The mansion was hers to live in, the wealth was her son's to inherit. Yet, the hall still echoed. She would walk past Alistair's study and see him staring blankly out the window, a ghost haunting his own life. She had won her safety, her security, everything she needed. But the cost was woven into the very fabric of her new life. A victory built on a foundational lie. A child who would never know her as his mother in the eyes of the world. And a home that would forever feel like a monument to a terrible, secret war. Years later, the manor was still, its secrets buried deep beneath layers of new routine. Alara stood at the same grand window where Eleanor had once stood, watching her son play in the garden under the watchful eye of a different maid. He had Eleanor's thoughtful eyes and a life of boundless opportunity ahead of him. Alistair was a diminished figure, living in the guest wing, his presence a faint whisper in the house he once commanded. Alara had everything she had fought for. She had protected her child. She had defeated the monster. She had secured a dynasty. But as her fingers traced the cold, polished marble of the windowsill, she felt the familiar bars of the gilded cage. They were no longer the bars of poverty and fear, but the bars of a story that could never be told, of a truth that could never be spoken. She was the keeper of the cage now, the guardian of its secrets. The final, lingering question was not about victory, but about price. She had won her freedom, but had she truly escaped? Or had she simply inherited the cage,